So now let's begin the webinar and let's get started with some introductions, starting with you, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Oops. There. Happy New Year, everyone. And that's the last time I'm going to say it to anyone. It's January 11th, and we cannot say Happy New Year anymore.
I don't know.
That's moratorium. We're really excited to be with you. I'm Jeff Schreipels, and I'm the principal and the owner of Veritus. And I've been doing this a long time. And I always love doing this one in January because it kind of sets the tone for the year and it kind of gives you an overview of what we think is really important out there in our sector. So glad you're with us. Evan.
Yeah, so I'm the outcast here. I'm the non-Veritas panelist. So happy to be here. Thanks, Jeff, for having me. I am gonna try to provide the private wealth, the donor perspective. I work with a lot of families who are charitable. I lead that work for Bernstein in the Mid-Atlantic. I'm sitting right here in Philadelphia. I know there's some people from the area here and live in Collingswood. I was also a former director of development, so I can commiserate with all the fundraisers on the call, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about donor advised funds today, but happy to answer any questions when it comes to how families are feeling at this point when it comes to the economy and giving.
Awesome.
Thanks, Evan. And he's local to me in the Philadelphia area, so I get to see him occasionally. That's kind of a cool thing. We don't always get to do that in a virtual world. I'm Diana. I've been with Veritus for just over 10 years. I had over 30 years in the nonprofit space before that, including being a major gift officer or managing them in all kinds of crazy things in development. You can do the math, kind of figure out my age, but here's the scary part. I got a notice from Medicare in January to start thinking about signing up. So I'm on the end of my career, but love being here with you today.
Awesome.
Hi, all. My name is Monica Birchfield. I am not on the East Coast. I'm actually just outside of Chicago. Now I'm looking at these numbers and realizing I have been doing this a while. So I spent most of my career, started out in fundraising, higher ed, nonprofits, and then actually decided I really like databases and IT. So I'm actually a cybersecurity architect by day, but I connect with our donors thinking about, or through coaching, I connect with organizations to help you guys think about how your tech serves your needs, along with you don't forget how to fundraise. So I'm actually one of the CLs here too.
Well, I'm excited to have all of you here because each of you are an expert in the area of the trends that we are going to be talking about. And that's exciting because then I don't have to fake like I'm an expert on these trends because we have real experts on here. Now, before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are at Veritus. Some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we are passionately relationship focused and grounded in a data-driven approach. And this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. Something that Richard and I, during our time in the direct response world, realized is that data is powerful. So when we found that most major gift programs were missing this critical piece, we knew it had to be an important part of our approach to major gifts. Now, over the last several years, we've had the opportunity to work with thousands of major gift officers, mid-level officers, and plan giving officers, and many on a weekly basis through our consulting work. So we know firsthand how this approach has helped organizations of all sizes and focuses to create authentic donor relationships that lead to a stronger donor pipeline and greater net revenue. Also, the lack of data was really concerning to us, and it still amazes us how many nonprofits do not adequately consider the data piece of this work. And that's why we have worked so hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not just our personal opinion. We've formed our recommendations through insight from the analysis of millions of donor records and the work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And We've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who have helped us learn and develop our strategy and approach. So, for our first trend of 2024, I want to speak to something alarming that I've been hearing across the sector, which is this return to metrics that prioritize actions over relationships. Now, the folks that are moving towards this and prioritizing actions wouldn't say they're prioritizing actions over relationships, but by focusing on these metrics, that's exactly what they're doing. Now, at Veritas, we've been advocating for advancing the sector's approach to metrics for years. And we believe that focusing on meaningful connections is absolutely critical if you want to see a significant impact in your relational fundraising program. And what we find over and over again is that the more traditional metrics, which are action-based, do not support building long-term relationships with donors. Here are some of the common challenges we're seeing. First, metrics that prioritize those actions or tasks add significant pressure and busy work to a fundraiser's plate. It shifts their mindset from, hey, how can I partner with this donor in a meaningful way, to, I need to get 5 more visits, otherwise I'll miss my goal. And that mindset shifts you back more into a transactional approach to managing your donors. It's more about checking a box or hitting a goal, not about the relationship with donors. And when you're focused on making a certain number of cold calls or sending a certain number of emails, you're not in a long-term strategic mindset. You're viewing your work and tasks from an immediate transactional perspective. And the truth is that metrics like this can often become a crutch for managers, and we'll touch on more in a moment. So, where do we recommend focusing in 2024? When we coach our clients, we're focused on 4 main areas. Is the fundraiser working their plan? Ultimately, this is the most important, because we know, having worked with thousands of fundraisers all over these almost 2 decades, we know that if a fundraiser works their plan, more often than not, they make their revenue goals and they build relationships with donors. So, is the fundraiser working their plan? Now, this plan is developed for a caseload of qualified donors that are tiered with individual revenue goals and communication plans. And once that plan is in place, the fundraiser needs to be working on that strategy. And that's a big focus for us, because ultimately, that's all the fundraiser can control. We also monitor and report on how a donor performs year over year. What changes have occurred with respect to revenue and value retention? Instead of metrics like the number of visits, emails, or calls, we look at the number of meaningful connections. A meaningful connection is a strategic interaction that moves the donor relationship forward. Now, I want to come back to my point about metrics being a crutch for managers. It's easy as a manager to just tell someone they need to do 10 visits a month and then track their success against that metric. But this is not really management. As a manager, you are there to provide accountability, coaching, and guidance. You're there to remove obstacles to the success of your team members so that they can create partnership with their donors, which means you need to be actively engaged and involved, and you need to create a space for them to do their work. Bogging fundraisers down with metrics that are transactional and aren't moving the relationship forward isn't going to help you see success in your fundraising efforts. We believe in managing by objectives, which keeps the focus more strategic and gives the fundraiser space to create a plan that they believe will best achieve their objective. We found that this makes a huge difference in the joy people have in their work and can reduce turnover, which is a major problem in this sector. So, metrics. All right. Monica, you have the next one.
Hey, thanks. So I get to talk about technology. So when we think about the role of technology, as we know, post-pandemic, it's everywhere, and it seems like it's just getting more complicated. So we're going to try to help break down a few things in a couple of slides. So when we think about what y'all should be thinking about going forward, I broke it down to three main areas: data, automation, and collaboration. What that really means is when we think about data, it could be everything: analytics, modeling, the, AI, which we will spend some time talking about as well. But all of that goes into data privacy, data governance, rules. It's its own discipline. Then we think about automation. So how we think about both marketing operations, so thinking about automating outbound messages or personalized touches, in addition to thinking about the tasks that some of those metrics that Jeff just referenced, right? So how do we automate some of the busy work or some of the things that you all need to keep your day going, because there's still tracking and other activities that need to be done, plans that need to be built, and so forth. Collaboration is the last one. And we think about that as, how do we make it easier for you to develop those meaningful connections, whether it's with your colleagues or also with your donors, because as y'all have probably lived through, donors are getting more comfortable texting with you. They're getting more comfortable doing video calls with you. But then there's going to be this whole slew of other ways to connect as we continue, what they're calling that fourth revolution. So the next slide is, how do we think about that when it applies in support of major gift work? So we really think about that as thinking about using your data. So again, you're going to hear me talk about data all day, but using your data to think about the best time to reach out. You can build those models, and there are different services and applications out there to help you do all of this. And you'll hear terms like, well, how do you build that model? Well, a lot of firms are offering these services for you, and some of you are already using a lot of them already and probably don't know it. So you're able to take patterns and identify patterns at scale, which, fun fact, that is a lot of what AI is really doing, is that it takes and analyzes and compiles data faster than humans, faster than a team of humans. And what it's doing is that it's going to help you build better portfolios or caseloads. What that also allows us to think about is then you start thinking about all the data you're collecting. So the donors' behaviors on your various properties or websites, social media, depending on how everything is connected. So you're collecting all these signals, and you're collecting all these preferences and these attributes, we call them, and you're able to use those to help make sure that you know that you're demonstrating that you know your donor. A lot of the biggest brands in the world already do this. This is why if I say shoes from Nordstrom's or any other brand, I'm going to magically start seeing it on every device I have. So there's a lot of things out there that I believe have already been adopted across some of our larger nonprofit clients, but that is making its way into becoming more accessible to nonprofits of all sizes.
Hey, Monica, can I ask a
yes.
quick question? So a lot of people have donor search and iWave and all that built in, but my guess is they are not actually leveraging that. Is that accurate? So the tool's there, yes. They're not using it.
That could be one. Yes, that's a good example. If you have a donor search or iWave, usually that spits out a bunch of numbers, right? So they're running a bunch of models for you and giving you numbers, and those numbers mean something. Usually it's formula based. So it's taking things like this is probably going down a sideways rabbit hole, but it'll take things like the value of their real estate, along with their age, along with what they assume they should have saved for retirement based on their age and years in the workforce, or other. It's pulling data from a lot of sources and then spitting it out into a propensity to give or some other formula. Databases today, in some cases, I know some better than others, but there are databases that you can build formulas into that will take that number in addition to data that you already have and build your own numbers. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying start using the data you have access to, the completeness level of a record. So as we're collecting information about our prospects or our donors, you're able to build these stronger and stronger models that then help you articulate, hey, this person is worth spending time with versus maybe this person isn't. It helps in building those portfolios to be a bit less frustrating, I would say.
Thanks.
Yep, thanks. Good question. Next slide. we start talking about AI. So this has been the hot topic inside of the Veritas team and outside, actually. So a lot of the questions that we keep hearing, and I guess the team funnels towards me, is what do I do with it? What, like ads everywhere. So what it really means is if you think about it at its very core, AI, or all these large language models, are a series of if-then statements. And what it's doing is it's being able to scour data sources all over the place and build these very robust responses because somebody spent a lot of time and money building them. And then all you're going to see is that's going to accelerate faster and faster. So if you take a core platform or application like a Chat GPT, for example, it's going to potentially find its way to other places, right? As they evolve their platform, other applications are going to take it and build on top of it. So you'll start seeing things like my Google Gmail is already asking me to summarize my emails before I read them, which is a nice little productivity boost. So the benefits that we see from an immediate perspective are things like those productivity enhancements, right? You can accelerate copy and content proposal generation, but there will be a caveat, which we'll talk about. It also helps with automation. So some of these regenerative models and other things are helping reduce human error. This is particularly true, we believe, more so in the medical space, because again, those routine repeat activities that are repetitive, you can allow technology to help you do some of it. There's always going to be a need for human eyeballs on a lot of things. So that's where I think some of the anxiety or concern around AI taking over, it's still a little bit of ways. Speed, like I mentioned earlier, these models can do things faster than people because it's like putting a team of people at it. This, I think, is going to be what's going to help mostly, well, all organizations of all sizes, but this is where some of our smaller clients are going to be able to do things that they wouldn't have been able to do before if they use these tools correctly. Consistency, you're going to be able to take some of those automations or some of those attributes or combine all of that and be able to improve that experience for both your donors and internally your workforce. Scalability, again, I keep thinking about my smaller nonprofit partners, but that's probably because that's most of my clients happen to be on the smaller side. But it's going to fuel exponential growth because you're able to, again, accelerate. You're able to think about those rules and let them implode at scale in a good way. Let's talk about maybe some of the concerns. There's three big ones that we think about there. Scaling up. You have to learn how to use these systems and applications. And it's one more application. It's one more screen. A lot of our clients will tell us it's one more thing I have to learn how to use. And it's worth the investment in learning in how to use some of these. But then the next thing to think about is what you put in is what you come out, which is why the critical thought doesn't go away. You will still need to think, is this the best thing for my donor? Is this best for my organization's brand or promise to my constituents? Thinking about data privacy and transparency. This is particularly one that makes my heart hurt the most when I think about people using AI. If you are using publicly shared models, your data is going in with everybody else's. So things that are what they call PII or like anything HIPAA related. So any of you all who are working in healthcare already know this. Everyone else should also know this. If you've given your donor a promise to keep their information safe and secure, putting their information into a large language model is not safe or secure because you're sharing that. Not necessarily, it's not the same as me saying, here's my phone number, please call me. But if you were to put a large list of things to try to make like a Chat GPT or some of those publicly shared, Bard is another one for Google, to do something for you, you've now exposed a bunch of data that could be mined. And that's where we get into the transparency of how those applications are used. There's a lot more out there. This is a very high level snippet summary of what I'm trying to explain. So if anyone has questions, I'm sure there's going to be a way for y'all to reach out afterwards. Always on. So this goes back to the small army. So it's these models are able to move at scale that a human cannot. What that also then the flip side means is that you can offer that experience or service for all of your donors at all times, but it's sort of the flip side of then how do you support all of that extra traffic content or inquiries, if you will. So you have to think about balancing what's reasonable based on your human factors, right? How many people you have to reasonably follow up on these requests or asks or other things that are coming out of all these large language models. And I think finally gets into how to use this safely. So when we think about all of those things we just talked about, these are some practical ways we believe that we can think about AI going into 2024. Think about easily translating those documents potentially into other languages. Again, making sure that we don't share things that I would consider IP for your various organizations or things that are program specific in a way that may be somewhat sensitive. But taking that out of it, a potential proposal to insert other content would be fine. So giving somebody a compelling document and then using that AI to generate something like that as a starter to help with writer's block. Summarizing information. So if you went through a meeting, maybe a lot of you have seen your Zooms or even Teams are able to start summarizing your meetings for you. Check your settings. But those are also ways that you can use those to see they're not always great. They don't always hear things correctly. It takes time to learn different accents and other things. My Chicago accent doesn't always make the best when it comes to some of these Zoom translations, but it does help accelerate some of that work for you. So you can be like, oh, right, we agreed on these action items at the end of a call. Again, going through those drafts for things that, if I'm your coach, you probably hear me say, where are your YMADs? What are your surveys? Where are your thank you letters? It can help you get those drafts going, and it can help you accelerate some of that to start personalizing things. But you should really take ownership of the personalization based on the relationship you have with your prospect or donor. And again, going back to the automation, it can help you automate repetitive tasks depending on the application that you are using. But again, always check with your IT teams to make sure you're using it safely, because that's the number one message I want to share. It's just use it safely. This is the time, if ever in your lives you're going to read terms and conditions, this is the year to do it.
So Monica, I'm in a meeting with my manager on Zoom and we're talking about 5 or 6 donors and the meeting notes happen. Secure, not secure?
It depends on your settings. So that's, again, it depends on the application you're using. It depends on the security settings of your organization. There's a whole slew of things, which is why read the terms and condition is the number one thing, or skim it. You could actually probably have AI summarize it for you. But then also talk to your IT teams or have the conversations internally. There are, on the IT side of the house, there's a whole lot, but there's a thing called NIST standards. And we use those to think about how to govern. I'll find it and make sure that we're able to share it afterwards. But if you really want to dive deep, there's some standards that are being developed that we are trying to all adhere to, or at least use to be able to be responsible and ethical in our use of AI. And a lot of that has to do with making sure that we are very transparent internally, externally, with how applications are developed to make sure you know exactly what your stuff is doing. Because really, at the end of the day, this all goes down to digital identity. Your identity belongs to you. And if that's true, then you need to know where your stuff is going, whether it's a donor or you as an employee of an institution and so forth.
So think before you have that.
I'm jumping quickly so we can keep moving.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I could probably go on for a whole session, but yes, I realize we got a lot to get
Monica, while we continue, we have some questions here, like what AI platform do you recommend for historical donor data, for prospecting? So in the chat box, if you could answer some of those about recommendations while we continue on other topics, that'll help us get more accomplished.
No problem.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Evan.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about donor advised funds. Just from a general standpoint, I know there's a large spectrum of people who are joining today. A donor advised fund, what is it? I like to say it's just a charitable bank account. or investment account, as you can invest the funds inside of a donor advised fund. And a donor advised fund is its own 501c3. Maybe actually, Jeff, just go back and stay on that title slide if you don't mind for a second. The title here, I think I'd almost want to flip on its head. It says nonprofits must prioritize opportunities with donor advised funds. But as I just said, a donor advised fund is a charitable bank account. You can't build a relationship with a charitable bank account. You have to build a relationship with the donor. It is donor advised. Therefore, the donor, the person, the family, the group who has control of that donor advised fund is the one making the decision about where those gifts get distributed. Most times, donor advised funds are created when families or individuals have some sort of liquidity event, and they're putting money aside to be held in a charitable fund or bank account that they want to give over many years. And so they'll give it all in that 1 year because you get the tax benefit of giving. Because a donor advised fund is a 501c3, you get it in the year that you give to it. And so you can have a tax credit in that way as if you were giving to a designated nonprofit. I'll just say one more thing, and then Jeff will move into the slides. There's a lot of myths. Like I said, I was a former fundraiser, and donor advised funds to me were this big black box of how do I get in touch with the donor advised fund, and is there a list, and how do I get on that list? And we know the Fidelities and the National Philanthropic Trust hold, billions of dollars in these donor advised funds, but how do I get the money out? And it always felt like there was just all this charitable money sitting. That's partly true, but donor advised fund holders are extremely charitable, meaning they've already designated money that they want to go to charity that's in the donor advised fund, and they're distributing funds at a very high rate, up to about 20% is coming out of donor advised funds every year. And if you remember, there's a requirement on foundations to give 5%. So there's always this push and pull of there's all this money in donor advised funds that doesn't come out. How do I get to it? Actually, that's not true. In the most recent report, which is at the end of 2022, National Philanthropic Trust, which says billions of dollars worth of non-donor advised funds, is their donors are giving out about 20% of their donor advised fund per year. So the reason we want to prioritize this is because it's becoming more and more prevalent because it's so easy to set up. More and more people have it. They range from small $5,000 donor advised fund to millions of dollars in donor advised funds, and we handle those at Bernstein as well. I think the average donor advised fund at National Philanthropic Trust is almost 200,000. So they're not small. And so big gifts can come out of that if you're thinking about 20% a year. So I just wanted to kind of level set a little bit there before we go into the next couple slides. And Jeff, we can.
Evan, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry,
There.
hit the key there. I think it's a really big unrealized opportunity because many people are not asking the donors that they're speaking to how they give. Are you giving by check? Are you giving appreciated stock? Are you giving from a foundation that you have? Or are you giving from a donor advised fund? And many people, and I work with a lot of sophisticated business owners and individuals who really want to make a charitable impact, but they're not experts in giving either. And they're relying on their other experts, myself, accountants, et cetera, to help them give most efficiently. And so they need to be reminded of some of the sources of where they give and how to most effectively give. And remember, this money has already been designated for charity. It has to go out the door to charity, either while they're alive or after they pass. You can designate a beneficiary, so a family member of a donor advised fund or a nonprofit can be the beneficiary of a donor advised fund. So it doesn't just stay in there, it can be passed down or given out, just like a bequest can be given from someone's personal assets. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us, if you're a nonprofit development director or fundraiser, to ask the question, how do you give? And do you give through a donor advised fund? And if you do, we can receive funds from there. And again, since it's already designated for a nonprofit, that money's got to come out. they don't have to get defensive about that. It's not their personal money anymore. It's money that needs to come out the door. And so it's a really great thing there. The other points that we're making here is because it's designated for charity already, if the economy's not doing well or they're not doing well personally, that money, again, has already been designated. So it doesn't affect their personal lifestyle to ask to give from a donor advised fund. So I think it just takes, again, a little bit of the pressure or tension off if you know they have that donor advised fund to do. Jeff, we can move maybe to the next slide there. I think I made some of these points already. But again, this is not a complex strategy. This is a very easy strategy to set up for donors. It's very effective for them. It's very low cost. And so it gives them a lot of flexibility on how they give, when they give, and to where they give. But they can build the same structures as if they had a private foundation through this. You know, we do note here there is no required minimum distribution. That is true. But like I said, in most cases, they're giving more than those vehicles that do have a required minimum distribution. Maybe, Jeff, we could go to the next. So how to maximize this? I think it goes back to Jeff's original point. How do we interact with our donors? How do we interact with the clients of mine? It's about telling those compelling stories that you all have and really building the relationships. I think it's opening their eyes to the fact that they can continue to give through a donor advised fund, that they can give more, that money is earmarked for donors, but you have to tell that compelling story to get the funds out of the donor, and the donor has to be the one to make that decision to do so. So it really goes back to the fundamentals of fundraising. It's just that we need to understand that more and more people are giving through these donor advised funds rather than maybe writing a check from a personal account or even providing appreciated stock. It's becoming a much more prevalent way that people are giving. And so you just want to have that language in your lexicon, in your newsletters, so that people are recognizing that you are able to accept gifts from there and that you can deal with gifts that come from your donor. The last thing I would just add, which I should have mentioned on top, one of the things that I think is a myth around donor advised fund is, well, it's a way for people to be anonymous. And going back to the data, less than 4% of givers who give from donor advised funds click the box, I want to have this gift anonymous. So most of the time, it should be clear on who is giving, and it's not a way to hide behind a giving strategy. You can do that. That is a facet of donor advised fund, but it does rarely happen when we look at all aggregate gifts. And I'll just share that, you know, I work with a lot of clients who are affluent and who are looking to make an impact, and they use these as a way to give. But at the end of the day, they're still coming to me and wanting to be made connections with on a personal level and understand organizations and get involved in the way that you would regularly engage and steward donors.
I think that's the key, Evan, what you just said there is these donors are looking to have a connection with that organization and somebody who's making that connection inside the organization of what's their passion and interests. And here are all the things that we can match that up with. Because somewhere along the line, they decided they needed a DAF. Somehow they're not being inspired to give directly to a nonprofit of their choice. And instead, they're putting into a DAF because it's more convenient. And they just don't have someone saying to them, hey, here's an exciting offer for you. I know that you love this, and here's what you could do to help change the world. So awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So big trend in 2024. Talk to your donors about how do they give. Talk about these donor advised funds. All right, Diana.
Thanks. And just a real quick caveat there. Anyone who's in leadership, get your CRM in order, because when those gifts come in from a donor advised fund, there can be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 gifts tacked to one transaction. It is critical to tie those back to the donor. The information's there. It takes work. That's not leisure, mañana, next week. now your gift officers have to know, which actually ties into staffing issues because it is a barrier when we don't pay attention to these kinds of things that a frontline fundraiser deals with. They're pulling out their hair right now. It's January 11th. They don't know if their donors gave because the back end side is so freaking slow. Now, I get it. It's a high volume, and I understand part of it is just sheer volume, but some of it is get your back end ready to handle this. We know December's coming every year. It's happened every year that I've been alive. So I'm thinking it's going to come every other year. So get from a leadership standpoint. This is the kind of stuff that drives your employees nuts. So we can just go ahead onto the slides. That's my caveat there. Hiring is hard. It's hard now. I think it's harder now than it's been in a long time. There are a lot of reasons for that. Fundraisers have a lot of ability to move in the marketplace. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs open in any given city or town. And a fundraiser can move very easily. So why is it hard to find good candidates? And the flip side is, why is it hard to get them? Your existing staff may not be as well trained as you think they are. Maybe they were never trained well in the database, so they have dissatisfaction growing. Or maybe they never really learned how to be a good gift officer and they feel uncomfortable. Surprise, surprise, some people get promoted up into management. They still don't understand the work that is going on in their team. And now they're managing those people. So you've got that piece of the problem, and you've got the people they're reporting to them that know that my manager doesn't really understand this. Your best fundraisers are not likely going to be your best managers. Guess why? Fundraisers are highly relational. They're outward facing. That's where they get their energy from. An introvert or extrovert. I know introverts can make fantastic fundraisers. This isn't about introvert, extrovert. This is about how they're wired to help the organization. You move them from a highly successful major gift officer and you move them to be a manager, and they die because that's not their thing. Interacting with HR and operations like that. So think about that. Undertrained people get moved into leadership. It's discouraging for the people who work with them. It ultimately is discouraging for that person. Hiring pools are filled with people who aren't a good fit. And you get so pressured about your understaffing and people burning out, you start plugging those holes with people who aren't a good fit. So what we really encourage you to do is to take a step back, look at your existing structure. Does it make sense? Do I have barriers for helping my existing employees succeed? And how does that play into the hiring process? You can go ahead, Jeff, to the next one. This is about supporting and retaining your staff because these things really go hand in hand. It's very hard to separate the two. If you're a manager and you're not on some systematic, regular basis encouraging feedback to your team, you're going to squash them. Yes, there's always course correction we need. I get it too. I get course correction. But I also need to know, hey, that was a good decision you made there. Hey, congratulations on this. And I did have a case where I had a manager who canceled my weekly meeting so much. If I talked to that person every 3 to 4 months, it was a lot in a focused one-on-one. I was so discouraged. If you're in leadership and you're not thinking about your staff that way, you've got to change direction because they have a lot more options and they can be gone. You want to actively partner with them and see where they need help. Don't assume because one person needs a greater training in the database that everyone needs it. Yeah, you can make people cry. Like, I have to go to one more seminar on X. Think about what each individual team member needs and bring that to them. Just like your donors. You wouldn't give all your donors the same donor offer.
Right.
Just translate what you know into managing your team and provide that system of accountability. I recently, I'm a runner. Last spring, I tripped 3 times running. 3 different reasons, but the truth of it is I tripped 3 times. And the last time I got seriously injured, not to the hospital injured, but enough that I was like, whoa. So I signed up for personal training for 6 months. 2 days a week with the trainer, 1 day a week doing what the trainer told me to do. It made a huge difference for me. And I went to it because I paid for it. But I had this scheduled meeting, and it was often at 6 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. It made a difference for me in that accountability to do the things I was supposed to do to move to my next level as a runner. Now, I'm not trying to run fast. I'm just trying to run smart. But that's my basic point. Put a system of accountability in place. Accountability is not to make somebody cry in a corner. It's to lift you up. So if you're a manager and you're providing the accountability and you're pressing them down, you need to get some training, because that's not the objective of accountability. That's not the objective of metrics. They're not to push you down. They're to help you grow. And then the last thing is the endless meeting. I coach fundraisers all week long, and it is not unusual to hear them come into my coaching call out of breath because they've been in 5 meetings already that day. They're a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Why are they in meetings about HR policies or what's happening in the snack room, or whatever crazy thing that's happening? Think about what you're doing when you're pulling people into meetings. Do they really need to be there? Because that does not encourage and uplift these people who are wired to be relational and outwardly focusing and talking and getting meetings or setting Zoom calls and maybe crafting a letter that's customized that'll bring a smile to someone. Think about what you're doing if you're a manager. So what are the candidates, the flip side, what are they looking for? They want a supportive and encouraging environment. Who wouldn't want that? They don't want to be burnout. They don't want, if they have an evening event that they're going to be required to be in the office at 8 a.m. They shouldn't have to work from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and then still drive home. Think about what you're doing with your team. Are you burning them out? Make sure there's opportunities for growth and advancement. Now, that doesn't mean that your major gift officer becomes a manager. Again, what are their abilities? Look at your salary structure. Like, why can you not reward I'm not talking about tying it to like you get a percentage of the gift. That's completely unethical. But if someone has been a gift officer for several years, can you make them a senior director? Can you have a compensation? Don't worry if a fundraiser makes more than a manager. Honestly, what difference does it make? It's 2 different skill sets. Reward the skill sets for what they're doing. So those are things to think about there. And salary can be a real barrier for fundraisers. You can be coming in with 15 years as a major gift officer's experience and command a salary that's the same as somebody else on the team who's done it 2 years. It's just not smart. It's not right, and it's not smart. So I really encourage you to think, what do you want to have happen? What you want to have happen is a gift officer stays with you for a big, long period of time, for the benefit of the organization, for the benefit of the donors, for the benefit of that person. How do you make that happen? Just because this constant churn over a $5,000 increase is killing you, because it costs way more than that to refill that slot. Keep building your understanding and be flexible about what's required in the fundraiser's role. I said a little bit about that before. The hours a gift officer works, they're kind of crazy. If you're East Coast based and you have West Coast fundraisers, you may be working at 7 o'clock at night to return some emails or make that call. Because if you call them at 1 o'clock in the afternoon East Coast time, that's not really going to get you very far. They're at work. And then you really want to make sure that the reality of the job lines with what you say in the job description and in the interview process. Do not promise the sun, the moon, and the stars if what you're going to give them is dirt or gravel, right? You've got to think very carefully to bring alignment so the person interviewing comes in with a full understanding and makes a good decision about joining with you. Because if you say one thing and they walk in the door and it's not that, forget about your 90-day review process. Remember, they're reviewing you in 90 days as well.
So I'm jumping on to say it's 2:45. So we want to keep moving.
I think I said all this stuff right here on this slide. So you can move on.
All right. Well, here is the next trend here. The next trend is about how giving audiences are changing, and some things you may want to be thinking about as you move into the next year. So there's some really interesting research coming out about changes in giving. Specifically, Giving USA released some really fascinating information about how millennial giving is pacing. Although it's important to remember that boomers are still the main audience for mid and major gifts, and Gen X, who I'm the first year of at 58 years old, is becoming more important as a focus as well. So Remember, Gen X, after the boomers, are the ones that are going to start to be giving major gifts. Both Gen X and millennials care a lot, however, about communication around impact. So that trend will continue to be critical. And some of the research is also suggesting that we need to expand the indicators we look for at giving likelihood. While age continues to be a significant factor, education level and religious ties are also important factors. And as you read articles about the new data coming out, here are a few takeaways and considerations from the perspective of mid-major and planned giving donors. Now, as I said a moment ago, boomers are still your priorities, so you cannot lose sight of those donors. They're the ones giving you the big net revenue for your organization. But it's important to work with your direct response team to make sure you're actively acquiring and cultivating Gen X and millennials. And while they may not be your core group of major donors right now, they will absolutely be in the next 10, 20 years. And right now, mid-level is a very valuable place to cultivate Gen X donors in particular. Overall, direct mail continues to be incredibly important. In fact, one of the most fascinating data points that came out of some of the recent research is how responsive millennial donors are to direct mail. And lastly, kick your engagement strategies into high gear to regularly share impact. This is important right now, and it will only become more important for donors upcoming.
All right. So 2024, giddy up, hold on to your seat. It's going to be a crazy election cycle with Iowa caucuses in the U.S. If you're a U.S. listener, everyone else, so sorry. But the caucuses start next Monday. Honestly, elections don't really have that much impact, little to almost no impact on fundraising, generally speaking. If you're in public media, you may get a bump because your services are so highly valued. So you want to, I would say, if you're talking to your donors in public media, you might ask them to consider a multi-year commitment so you don't have the high and the low as a result of that. But everybody else, they still care about what you're doing. You still want to communicate impact to them. Don't get all scared about this, but be smart about timing. If you're doing something, you are a mid-level officer and you are working on a campaign with your team, pay attention to when those primaries are. So if you're doing a call campaign, don't call your donors the week of that primary. Just be smart. Same thing when it comes to next November in the U.S. Again, that's our election. Just pay attention to what's going on and work around it. But at the end of the day, your donors still care about what you do.
And Diana, I just wanted to add one thing. Sorry, cutting you off there. We did the same thing. We've done a lot of research around as direct investors. Is there volatility around election? If there's a Republican president or a Democratic president, does the economy do better in any of those? It is almost equal. And actually, Democrats, the economy does 0.2% better when a Democrat is president. It's essentially de minimis. So again, even there, it does not make over a long-term period of time a difference on how the economy really works either. Not determined there. All I would say is, to your point, timing, right? Around that time, there will probably be volatility within the economy as the market tries to understand who is going to be elected and how do their policies impact the economics in the short or even medium term. So around that time, there could be, but again, over long term, we don't see that either.
Yep. So I said a lot of the things that's on the slide Jeff just went to, but my counsel to you is talk earlier to donors. You know, you can begin the donors who give in Q4 from a calendar year perspective. There's no problem talking to them today. Jeff, you've been incredibly generous. Are you open to a conversation of what your philanthropy might look like in 2024? There's a lot going on in our nation. I'd love to know what you're thinking.
Yeah. Good stuff.
You can get rid of the stories you tell yourself. And I think that's the thing. Stop telling yourself stories.
All right. So those are the top 10 trends we're looking at in mid-level major gifts this year. Now, before we get time to our questions, I wanted to let you know that we want to help you build transformational relationships with your donors and bring these trends into your strategy and approach in 2024. There's a major reason why we created Veritus Group Academy and why I wanted to share that our first round of the certification course and our brand new fundraising masterclass program are starting soon. Just here's a note from one of our Academy alumni about the value of this information and how it's helped her raise money for her organization. And we've had over 6,000 people go through our Academy, and their fundraising has been dramatically affected for the good. Now, if you're ready to say yes to your personal and professional development as a fundraiser, then you're in luck, because we are running a special discount on our February certification courses right now. For the next week, you can get 10% off when you register using the code on the screen. We know a lot of organizations have had a budget constraint, which is why I wanted to make sure you knew about this discount. And now, Karen, let's go to some questions.
Awesome. Evan, have you had a chance to look in the Q&A box at some of the questions for you yet? You want to touch on some of those highlights to start us out?
Yeah, I'm trying to answer as I can, and happy obviously to talk offline around it. I think a lot of them talk about, how do I identify donor advised funds or fund holders? Community foundations, I saw some people responding, sometimes do have ways that you can talk to or ask what are issue areas, and they do events where they bring donors of certain missions together with nonprofits. But in most cases, you can't call up a National Philanthropic Trust or a Fidelity Charitable and say, who are the donor advised funds giving to education or giving to why? It's confidential. That's information they can't give out. And again, it just goes back to, you have to build the relationship with the individual and then ask the question, how do you give? And once they identify that, then you can help leverage which vehicle they give and understand the best way to accept those gifts. I think those are a lot of the questions that have been coming through.
Great, thanks. And Jeff, I've got a request to go back to the discount code, if you wouldn't mind. This is a great comment, Jeff, back to the piece around metrics. Yeah. So an anonymous person says, I can appreciate the push for objectives, but would still argue that performance metrics support relational objectives. If you're not in touch with your donors, top of inbox, face-to-face, you're likely going to underperform on your relationship objectives. There is a correlation between action metrics and revenue outcomes. As a fundraiser, I do not manage fundraisers, but it helps me stay on track. So talk a little bit about that toggle.
Well, it depends on the type of metrics. So action metrics, like, for example, number of face-to-face visits per month. This is notorious in universities. They'll have, like, you need to have 25 face-to-face visits. What happens, instead of those being visits that are meaningful, at the end of the month, or at the last week of the month, those fundraisers are scrambling to get face-to-face visits with anyone they can, because that's a metric that if they check off and their manager somewhere else is looking on their computer, oh, they hit all 30 or 25 visits, then they're good. And so whatever you measure is what you will have the results of. So if that's your measurement and that's how you're managing people, that's what they're going to do. I've seen it, like, you have to have a number of emails, you have to have a number of visits, all those kind of transactional type of things. Now, I understand they're all set up to help you get in front of people, but much better for us, and what we've learned is, if you have a plan for every donor with a revenue goal that's cash flowed with that donor, then if you're working your plan, you're making your goal. And if you have a manager that is meeting with you every week or very next to every week, and they're working with you to make sure that you're actually working that plan, that to us is far more meaningful for the fundraiser and for the donors, because they're having meaningful connections, because that plan has those meaningful connections in that plan. So that to us is how we want to manage a major gift fundraiser, not by having a bunch of them, have these action items that they have to check off by the end of the month. Because we know, because we've talked to these fundraisers, that they're scrambling at the end of the month just to get that thing checked off, whether it's even an important meeting or not. So that's why we're so adamant about that.
Thank you, Jeff. So Diana, there's some comments here from some folks in smaller organizations, and they're like, okay, there's AI, there's DAFs, there's metrics, there's yada, like it feels overwhelming and I don't have a lot of capacity. So what should I focus on? How do I start? And Monica, you can jump in as well.
If you're talking about the relationship side of fundraising, the major gift or the mid-level or the plain giving, and you've got a lot going on, you create work to scale. So if you're a person and you've got 3 major responsibilities, one of which is direct fundraising, that's 30% of your time. Create a plan that actually fits 30% of your time. You have to bring things to scale. So you also say you want to start doing more in AI or whatever. You have to think in advance, how much time do I have to give to this? And then learn what can you accomplish with that amount of time. That way you're taking a lot of pressure off of yourself and you can actually begin to check things off your list. My best counsel, when you're small, does not mean bad. It just means you have to think more wisely about what you do, and you can't chase every new thing. Don't skip the tried and true methods. Like don't not send direct mail for 3 months because you're doing something else. Just focus on what you can accomplish. That might sound kind of trite, but there's really no other way to achieve that. Monica, you might have something to add, particularly about the AI part of it.
Yeah, I think of it as when you mention the percentage, I think of a paper plate, and I mean, I still do this because my brain's going in 5 different directions at all times. So I make a paper plate and shade in where I think I need to spend my time versus where I'm actually spending my time. And you can do this at an org level too. And then you start putting the resources in to help fill the gaps. So that helps you start prioritizing maybe some of those tech investments. You can't use tech to replicate an individual relationship. So you know that that's always going to take time, but you can use tech to automate tasks or do some of those other things. So then you start being able to say, well, what can I shop out? And so like my mantra for 2024 is do only the things I can do and then try to outsource or automate the rest.
Thank you. So Evan, there's a couple comments about expiration date related to transfer of generational wealth. Can you address that quickly?
Trends on generational wealth
passing?
passing.
Yeah, having an expiration date related to transfer of generation of wealth.
So there is, this might be getting towards this question, there is what's called a gift exclusion, an estate gift exclusion, which is now set at $13 million per person. So you can give up to $13 million per individual out to other family members or entities. That is to be reduced in half at the end by 2026 if legislation does not extend that. I think that is the expiration date there of the giving that they're talking about. So yes, there is this cliff, as many would call it, where it's going to reduce how people can give. Of course, if you're a family, you can give up to 26 million away without having worry. Right now that'll go down to about 13 and then grown with inflation if legislation doesn't impact it.
As a nonprofit, Evan, do I have however long I want to spend that gift? Are there any limitations there?
Yeah, so this is gifting not to charities but to individuals. So I'm a father, I can give to my best friend, I can give to my daughters, without that being part of my estate from a tax perspective, not to nonprofits. That there's no expiration on that. There was a question on DAF expirations. If they don't give for a certain amount of time, or do DAFs have to spend out in a certain amount of time? The answer is no, though I know most DAF holders entities have a limit of dormancy. So if a DAF doesn't give for 3 years, they reach out to that donor and say, you haven't given in 3 years. Our rule is you must give within a 3-year period. They encourage, and that I think level of severity of consequence goes up if they do not continue to give, and then I think it needs to be moved after that. But that's each fund holder.
Fantastic. So Jeff, I'm going to close us out. Thank you, Evan. Jeff, would you close us out with just a final word?
I want to thank everyone for staying on. We're over our time, and I apologize for that, but a lot of you have stayed on for the webinar, so I really appreciate that. Please get a hold of us if you have any questions of any of these trends and any more in depth, we want to help you. We want to get you information that will help you and your organization succeed in 2024. And thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to partnering with you in the next year.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for joining us. Remember, you'll get a recording and a copy of the slides tomorrow. And if you're interested, reach out to academy@veritusgroup.com, and we'll help you with the course questions that you have. Thank you all. That was fantastic. Enjoyed being with you.